Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Sherry Russell. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Carson City, and I would like to welcome everyone to the 4th Annual Open House for our 2020 budget. I'll be presenting an overview of all of the expenses in that budget. I also want to take a moment to thank the finance staff for the long hours they worked and dedication to the city. We have a lot of funds and it takes a lot of time to put this stuff together. So really wanted to take a moment to thank them. The presentation information and this presentation will also be available on carson.org/budget if you're interested. So let's proceed. The general fund. We have over 35 different funds, as I said, and every single one of them has restrictions on how we can use that money, with the exception of the general fund. So we'll spend a lot of time talking about the general fund. So first off, this is a breakout of the revenues. 70% of our revenues are property taxes and C-tax. So we'll spend the majority of time focusing on those components of revenue. This is a historical slide that shows since 2010 the various components of our revenue. And as you can see, the orange color, C-tax, and the dark green color is our property tax, the vast majority of our revenues year over year over year. Sorry, I keep wanting to turn off my mic. Okay, so let's go a little deeper into property taxes. Bear with me, it's a little boring, but it's a very, very important part of our revenues. So this slide shows the actual rate back to 2010. And in fiscal year 13, we were kind of at our worst point in the recession, and we had to increase our property tax rate to 47 cents to the maximum of 3.66. And then the following year, we had a 10-cent decline. We eliminated the Sierra Forest Fire Protection District, and now our fire department does those duties. So the 10 cents decreased there. We decreased a couple cents each year, and then in 2018, an effort to hedge against future recessions and declining assessed values, and to provide a more stable revenue source for the asset management program, the board approved a 5-cent increase. So for fiscal year 2020, we proposed to maintain the rate at 3.57. With the assessed value rise and the tax cap, an increase or a decrease would yield in very little profits for either the taxpayer or the city. This slide shows the assessed valuation of the general fund property tax revenues back to 2010. So as you can see, 13 and 14 were kind of the bottom for us, and then assessed value started to increase. In fiscal year 13, the orange line spikes there, and that's that 47-cent increase in our revenues. And then it's very stable revenues. As you can see, assessed values is climbing. And because of the tax cap, we expect it to meet revenues at some point in the future. For fiscal year 20, assessed value is projected to increase 6.7%, but general fund property tax revenue is only increasing about 4%, and that's because of the property tax caps. This shows where Carson City is amongst all of our other Nevada counties. And you can see we're at 3.57, so we're one of the lower tax rates in the county, with most of them being at the very top, 3.66. Although I need to say that those are projected numbers, that the Red Book is not published yet. It will be published in July. So the next revenue source is consolidated taxes, and these are all the components of consolidated taxes. 88% of consolidated taxes are made up of number 5 and 6 there, the basic city-county relief tax and the supplemental city-county relief tax. So again, we'll focus on the big numbers. Of course. That is not a part of C-tax. No, marijuana is actually a business license tax. And there's a separate allocation that we get that's only about $300,000, I believe. Well, we're projecting about $800,000 in business license. I believe it goes to the school districts. The state and the school districts, yeah. 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 Yeah.
No, they pay directly to the state.
So this graph shows our taxable sales year over year and the components of it. By far, our largest is the vehicles, the motor vehicle and parts, which is the dark green number. So this is just what our sales taxes are made up of. This is the history of C-tax actual revenue that has come in. And it doesn't show far enough back because we only do 10 years, but C-tax revenue dropped $9.3 million from 2006 to 2010. So this is our most volatile source of revenue. The fact that we had a fund balance reserve of 22% in 2007 helped us get through that hard time. I'm sure most of the long-term employees remember those years. Current C-tax revenue is showing strong growth in 2017. We surpassed the peak level of 26.8%. And so we're still going up from there. But it's important to remember that today's dollar is a lot, 25% less than the dollar back in 2006. So we're still a little behind the 8 ball. Fiscal year had an actual increase of 8% over the prior year, which is really great. We're projecting a 6.6 increase for fiscal year 19. Currently, with 7 months of data, we're at 7.4%. And we've projected 2.5% increase for fiscal year 20. Everybody, I'm sure you've heard on the news, is talking about an economic slowdown. So at this point, we're basically preparing for the worst, but hoping for the best. So if there's not any other questions on revenue, we can move to expenses. By far the biggest portion of expenses is the public safety at 47.8%. Public safety includes fire, sheriff, juvenile detention and probation, and alternative sentencing. Coming in second is general government at 24.3%, and that includes finance, IT, HR, city manager, assessor, and treasurer, as well as the DA, planning, facilities, courts, and the clerk recorders. So all kinds of departments are included in that one. General fund expenditures for fiscal year 20 are relatively flat when compared to fiscal year 19, showing only a slight increase of 0.4%. This is our historical slide on the components of the expenses. So both greens there are public safety and general government, the vast majority of our expenses, and consistently so, as you can see. Fiscal year 2020, this is the expenditure categories. So, and again, very consistent. Our salaries and benefits make up 76% of all of our expenses. The city currently maintains 10 separate employee bargaining agreements as well as contracts. And we've got, we budgeted in accordance with those contracts. So. Okay, this is our employees. So we are still down 10 employees from fiscal year 10. We had 450 employees in the general fund, and we have 440 as of the 2020 tentative budget, with only minor increases since 2011. Prior to the recession in 2007, the city employed 634 employees citywide, and currently we have 597. So we're still down by 37 FTEs. Public safety, as you can see by the slide, makes up 50% of the general fund employees. And the tentative 2020 budget includes 0 new FTEs. If there are any new requested FTEs, they'll be part of the supplemental requests that'll go to the board on April 18th. This just shows our operating revenues exceeding expenses. The revenues are the gold line. The difference between the two are used for capital improvements, extraordinary maintenance, debt service, or increases to the fund balance reserve. And this is a snapshot of what the tentative budget will likely look like. Again, this has not gone to the Board of Supervisors. The slide shows actual for 2018, that's an audited figure, and then 2019 estimating through the rest of this fiscal year, and then our 2020 budget. The reason the expenses in 2019 are so high is there's carryover of restricted funds in there, about $1.1 million, that will most likely be carried to the following year as well. We've budgeted for a contingency in 19 and 20. That's for unknown expenses that arise. 250 to get us through the end of this year, and then 500,000. So if those are not spent, they would fall to ending fund balance. Capital improvements is another big number on this slide. For 2020, we're projecting $7,773,000 in capital improvements. And I'll show you exactly what that's made up of on the next slides. It's a very slight increase. Last year, it's just $224,000 more than last year. The city's current financial policy is to maintain an ending fund balance at a minimum of 8.3% and annual expenditures with a goal of 16.67% as an operating reserve in the general fund. As identified in the slide, in 2019, we're projecting a 13.67 ending fund balance. And then expenditures for 20, we're looking at 8.32. So we are meeting the minimum fund balance. Okay, so assets, deferred maintenance. So this is our 210 fund, our capital projects fund. The landfill and the general fund transfer, the two large numbers on there, that's that $7.7 million we just talked about in capital that's coming from the general fund. The property tax, the 5 cents, that is actually a much larger number that we get in property taxes. However, we've taken out the debt service. So we have to pay debt service out of this money, so that $337 is what's left. And then there's about $30,000 in interest earnings. Lack of funding for many years of deferred maintenance has taken its toll on city assets. For fiscal year 20 budget cycle, we've made it a priority to put as much towards capital improvements and equipment replacement as possible. We don't want to go into another recession having 20-year-old vehicles. So that was the revenue side. As far as what we're going to propose that we spend it on, again, we won't be proposing this until April 18th, but this is our list. The first item on here is break fix. We always budget for a break fix. This is unforeseen things that happen during the year. And then you'll see throughout the vehicle replacement program, the fleet vehicle replacement, I'll show you a slide of all the vehicles at the end. But those are pretty good numbers. The biggest number here is the $500,000 for the ERP software. This is Tyler software that we're implementing. The financial portion will go live July 1st, so this is the final payment of this implementation. And then payroll will follow January 1st. And there's a couple other systems that we'll be implementing as well. Parks and Rec, we have a lot of old, we have an old irrigation system and a lot of playground equipment that's fairly old. We don't want kids to get hurt, so we're gonna, just for safety reasons, put some money into our playgrounds. And then landfill is funded by landfill revenue transfers from the general fund. So that's equipment needed at the landfill. By far the biggest item here is the asphalt at the Edmond Sports Complex. If you've been out there, it's amazing the size of the cracks in asphalt. And we've got children and families running around out there. So to avoid any accidents or people getting hurt, we're going to fix that in 2020. So this is that 8,041,041 number that matches to the revenue slide that was up there. So that's our list that we're proposing to the board for capital in 2020. And then as promised, I know it's small, I'm sorry. These are all the vehicles that we're replacing. I tried to help make it a little bigger. There's 6 pickup trucks and parks, and as you can see, every single vehicle on there is over 10 years old, the oldest being 23 years. So. And then each year, when we do our budget, we do a 5-year projection to ensure that we can cover our ongoing costs in the general fund. Revenue projections are very conservative for 21 through 24. There's a 2.5 increase in C-tax for 20 and 21, and then the increase that to 3.5% for 22 to 24. There's a 4% increase in property taxes for each year, and then 1.3% for all the other taxes, or all the other revenues. We budgeted salaries in accordance with the contracts that I mentioned before, and then there's 7.5% annual increase in group medical. We have contingency across the board, about $500,000. To get to that 8.32% in 2021, I had to go down to $475,000, which should be fine. We've identified the amounts of additional funds available for expenditure by fiscal year over the amount needed to maintain compliance with the board's ending fund balance policy, a minimum of 8.3% in fiscal year 20 to 24. So if we want to see that fund balance percentage grow over the 5-year period, then we would just have to cut back on capital funding or supplemental requests. So that's the general fund. I'm going to go over a few special revenue funds and a few enterprise funds. Special revenue funds, again, these are restricted funds. They must be spent for a specific purpose. So the first one I'll talk about is the quality of life. This was question 18 on the ballot several years ago. We are projecting a 2.5 increase in sales taxes, just like we did the general fund. By far the biggest project we've ever had in here is the Multi-Purpose Athletic Center, the MAC. And we are paying debt on that. That's a $640,000 number. So we have a bunch of undesignated dollars up there, $424,000. Those are for land purchases and open space. There's $563,863. We actually put everything in undesignated until the board approves it. So in 210, that whole $8 million would be in undesignated until the board approves it. So this is going to sit in undesignated, but we're looking at updating the equality facility plumbing replacement for $150,000, and then a rainmaster irrigation upgrades for $250,000. Those are the biggest ones in that one. And then there's a $120,000 payment to the Boys and Girls Club that we've been making every year. The infrastructure fund. This is used to account for a 1/8 sales tax, which includes the MAC, the animal shelter, various corridor improvements throughout the city, downtown and south, Carson Street projects. Additional debt is expected to be issued on this in the next few years. Fiscal year 19, we completed the Curry Street corridor project, and then we started design on the South Carson Street corridor. That $3 million in capital is about 50-50 for the Curry Street versus the South Carson. And then in 20, that money will go towards the South Carson Street project. For RTC, this is county fuel tax. So we're estimating a 3% increase in fuel taxes for fiscal year 20. which gives us about $4 million in revenue and fuel taxes. There's 1.6 million budgeted for debt, and then 11.4 million for capital projects. By far the biggest project is the South Carson Street project. We did get $5 million in funding from NDOT to accomplish that project, as well as 7.5 million in a Tiger grant. The street maintenance fund, again, we got 3% increase in fuel taxes, revenue of approximately 5 million in this fund. 2.3 million is for salaries and benefits, and then we've got 815,000 for capital equipment needs. Again, this is maintenance, so there's not a lot of capital in this fund. It's more street maintenance. Enterprise funds. So these are funds that are run like a business, so they're expected to support themselves. So the Utility Finance Oversight Committee reviewed these budgets already and will be recommending to the board. The Financial Oversight Committee meeting was on March 26th, and so they'll be recommending it on April 18th. The Stormwater Drainage Fund. So they all include a 0% rate increase because all of the rates have been implemented. So at this point. So for 2020, we're not expecting any rate increases. Salaries and benefits increased a little bit. We had an environmental control foreman that changed. At the bottom there, you can see 2.35 to 2.4. So 0.05 of the environmental control specialist will be added to this. And then that's just employee benefits and merit increases. Service and supplies increased very marginally at $16,000. And capital outlay is planned of $555,000, $305,000 for a street sweeper, and then $250,000 for system maintenance. We did bond for $4,875,000, and that is all budgeted for in 2019. So projects that aren't complete will roll forward to 2020. This is the fiscal policies for the stormwater drainage. I'll go through these real quick. The operating revenue is usually 30 to 90 days of operations. So the goal is 103 and we meet that goal. The capital reserve is 2% of capital assets. The goal there, and then we meet the goal. And then the system reinvestment funding, that is a factor of depreciation. So whatever depreciation is, that's what we want to reinvest in our system. We meet that goal. The debt to equity ratio is the only one we don't meet. And we knew we weren't going to meet this. This has been an ongoing, we'll have to pay down our debt in order to meet it. So it'll be 4 or 5 years before we meet this goal as we slowly pay down the debt. And then the debt service coverage, we always want higher than 1. 1 means we can 100% cover our debt. So we're at 1.2, so we can cover our debt. So the stormwater fund is in fairly good shape. We just need to work on that debt to equity ratio. The sewer fund, same thing here. We are in the 4th of 5-year phase-in of the connection charge increase. However, being finance people, we budget very conservatively. They're talking about an economic downturn. So the connection charges, you can see it's that third line down. We're getting, at this point now, $884,770. We've only budgeted $160. So we might have extra funding to play with, but we don't want to count our chickens before they hatch. There's moderate salary increases. Again, there's that 0.35% of that environmental control foreman we moved. And services and supplies decreased, mainly because of the general fund internal service charge. Capital outlay for 2020 is $3.4 million. And in 19, it's a really big number of $17,292,000. That's primarily the second phase of the water resource recovery facility, which is almost complete. So, and then to go into a little more detail on that $3.4 million for capital, these are the items that sewer is planning on spending its capital on next year. And if you have any questions on this, Darren Schultz, the Public Works Director, would be happy to help you. Sewer fund, these are the financial policies for the sewer fund. They meet all of their financial policies. The sewer fund is in great shape. The water fund. Okay, so same thing here. We're in year 4 of 5 of the connection charge increase. Moderate increases in salary benefits, moderate increases in services and supplies, and their capital outlay is $3.2 million. In November, we issued $7 million in water bonds to complete the final phase of the east-west transmission main, and that's included in the 18-19 budgeted numbers. So if we're not done, it'll roll forward into 20. Here's those capital, the $3.2 million, what we're spending the capital on in that fund. And then the fiscal policies. Like stormwater, this one's got quite a bit of debt, so we have to wait, I'm guessing 2 years on this one where we'll meet those the debt equity ratio. The goal with the rate increase from 13 to 18 was to manage that debt to equity ratio. We had a lot of debt on our books. So we're trying to do more pay-as-you-go. So various city departments are at individual stations here in the room, and they'll provide handouts highlighting their various functions. They perform as well as answer any question, listen to ideas, concerns, or suggestions for our 2020 budget. If you're interested in commenting on our fiscal year 2020 budget, there are comment forms throughout the room, and all of those comment forms will be heard at our April 18th Board of Supervisors meeting if you make a comment. That's all I had, unless you have any questions. Thank you.